Welcome to this licensing hearing, and the first item on the agenda is to appoint a chair, and I understand that members would like Councillor Mason to be the chair of the meeting, so I'll hand over to Councillor Mason if that's agreed. Thank you, members.
Good morning and good morning, members. Thank you for putting me in the chair. I'll take us through then this morning's licensing hearing agenda, which obviously is for 12 George Hudson Street. So the first item is the chair, which we've elected. Second item is introductions. I think given we've got quite a large group of people, I'll introduce the two members I'm sat with. So I've got Councillor Hook and Councillor Pearson. Leslie Cook is the licensing officer. Fiona Leung is our democracy officer. Sandra Brannigan is our legal advisor. Mr. Craig, do you want to introduce who's with you today?
Yeah, sorry, just scrambling for my mouse there. Yes, I'm here to represent the applicant who likes to be known as Kevin Leung, and he is also in attendance. Kevin, do you just want to say hi? You need to take your microphone, you need to unmute your microphone, Kevin. I do it all the time, don't worry.
Yes, I'm sorry, yeah, okay, yeah, I'm here.
Good morning.
Yep, can you hear me? Yes.
We can hear you very well, thank you.
Okay.
And just to confirm, Mr. Craig is the barrister representing you. Sergeant Booth, do you want to introduce who's with you this morning?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Sergeant Booth. I'm the Force Licensing Manager for North Yorkshire Police, and I'm obviously representing the police this morning at the hearing. I have PC Kim Hollis, who is one of my witnesses. I've also called Glyn Jones, Immigration Officer, and Helen Sefton, Senior Licensing Enforcement Officer from City of York Council.
Brilliant. And in the background, we've obviously got our two technology experts that are keeping the meeting going. So sorry if I've missed anybody else. I think that is everybody. Members, item 3, declarations of interest. Either of you have anything to declare? Brilliant. Item 4 brings us on to exclusion of the press and public. Obviously, if we needed to discuss something that was sensitive or met the legal test for us to be able to do that, we would. Obviously, our deliberations will be held in private. The other thing I'd like to pick up at this point, Sergeant Booth, is that some of the papers that have been submitted by the police, so what we would call salmon papers or pink papers or exempt papers, having read them, I'm not of the opinion that they shouldn't be put into the public domain. So what I'm going to ask is that we take a vote on that with the two of the members to decide whether we think we should be putting those papers into the public domain, which obviously means they'll be published a bit later on today, I imagine. Have you got any observations to that before we take a vote on it?
No, Chair, I've got no concerns. There's nothing that would concern me about them being published. Thank you.
Brilliant. Members, are you both happy that we resolve to publish those papers and make them public? Brilliant.
Chair, excuse me, Chair.
Yep.
May I just to add is that there are a couple of matters in those papers which we would normally redact, such as dates of birth. And on page, sorry, there is a third party referred to. Sorry, Chair, I'm looking away down at my papers.
No,
there is
on page 79, Sandra. 79.
Thank you, Leslie. There is a third party referred to, and we would usually redact that third party. Does that sound acceptable?
That's fine. Yeah, I think so. As long as the majority of them are going into the public domain, we can withdraw anything that we wouldn't normally publish.
Thank
members,
you.
both. Sorry.
Sorry.
Councillor Pearson, you're happy with that? Councillor Hook?
Happy, Chair. Thank you.
So, Chair, just to confirm that therefore those papers currently marked as exempt will be published retrospectively as soon as possible with those matters we just discussed redacted. Thank you.
Yes, please. Thank you. Excellent. On to the minutes. I'm happy to approve the minutes of the licensing hearing held on the 9th of November. Members, do I have your support for that? Brilliant. So this brings us on to the determination of the application, and I'm aware that Mr. Craig has got some more papers, and I think would probably like to speak to us just regarding that that matter.
I would. Thank you. Yes, it's unfortunate that that I'm forwarding these documents to you at this stage. I hope I've adequately explained the reason behind that in emails that you may or may not have seen. I can explain that further if you wish, but basically I had some significant personal issues last week, and was not at work really till Thursday afternoon, and I made contact with Jackie Booth then, and she was perfectly understandably on leave Thursday and Friday, and so accordingly I wasn't able to speak to her before this morning. I would just add as well that my instruction only came in was confirmed last Monday, the 18th, and in addition to that, I didn't get a chance to speak to my client properly until Tuesday. So look, referral came from Charles Hamer. Forgive me, Charles Hamer, Charles Holland. Charles Hamer is a former colleague of mine, Charles Holland, and accordingly, I moved as quickly as I felt I reasonably could in the circumstances. And I wanted to speak to North Yorkshire Police about the documents that I've forwarded, because they contain a number of proposed conditions. I can't remember the exact number, but I think it's 24 when I last counted. It's 26, in fact. And it's right to say, I had a helpful conversation with Jackie this morning. I think it was helpful on both sides. I hope she thinks that as well. And she still has some concerns about the application. She obviously will address you on what I'm about to say. But certainly, I don't think it's fair on her that she's not had the chance to properly consider these documents just by virtue of the circumstances we find ourselves in. There's no prejudice. If we do, my application is going to be to adjourn this, and I'll address you on that in more detail on the test shortly. But certainly I feel, and I think she feels as well, that adjourning this, it could potentially assist the process to some extent. And I don't think anyone's going to be prejudiced by this. The reality is, my client, Kevin, has applied for a premises license, which if you were to grant it today, he simply isn't going to be in a position to lawfully operate for some significant time in any event. I can't see any licensed premises being able to open personally before April. And that's me being by nature an optimistic person. It may be after that. And so he's going to be in no worse position. And it may assist the process, because I think it's right to concede at this stage that the application that was submitted was deficient. It wasn't good enough in the first instance. I think he's been poorly represented, Kevin, and I've sought to make it a much more robust operating schedule. That's a recognition of the concerns that the police, I think, legitimately have about other operations in the city, but it's also a recognition of where this premises is located, which is within your community impact area. And it's right to concede that the application as it was submitted simply didn't address that in any meaningful or significant way. So having had the conversation with Jackie, she agrees with me, and obviously she'll speak for herself, that process could be assisted. She still has concerns around the DPS, and it may well be that an adjournment, and I'm thinking in terms of maybe a month, something along those lines. If she's got concerns about the DPS, it may be that the applicant can use that period purposefully to find perhaps an individual who may be more acceptable to North Yorkshire Police. And that's not tying their hands in any way or prejudicing their position, and they're perfectly entitled at any point to just say we're not happy with this application for any reason. But I do feel in the circumstances, given the circumstances that have led to me not being able to speak to the responsible authority who made representations before this morning, the fact that it's not like a review where the license holder's kicking a can down the road. It's not, he's going to be no worse off by this adjournment, and nobody else is prejudiced by it, I would say. And it just gives myself and North Yorkshire Police a bit more time to maybe at the very least narrow the issues and maybe end something beyond that. But again, I'm making no predictions as to that. But so that's essentially the applicant's position as we stand now. I'm very sorry about the timing. I don't like. I do quite a lot of these hearings and very rarely make an application at this stage. The test is the public interest. I would submit the public interest is met, because if the parties are in agreement and feel that there is a potential that matters can be at the very least clarified between them and potentially more than that, and resolved in some way, or maybe not entirely, but to some extent, then I would submit that's got to be in the public interest. Licensing works best when it works collaboratively, and like any form of litigation, I suppose, if you can avoid a hearing, that's always got to be a good thing in my view. So that's the application. It's to adjourn, and again, I apologise it's at this stage, but I have instructions to do that. I think it's sensible. I know Jackie will speak for herself, but based on my conversation with her, I think she agrees with me. And it's just not fair on her. She needs time, because there's documents in there like a copy of the lease, and she needs to consider that, and that she needs time to do that. And I think it's right and fair. So that's the application. I shall stop talking now. I'm paid to talk for a living, but that is the application, and it may be that you want to hear from other parties, but certainly that's the application. Thank you.
Okay, just before we hear from Jackie, one question that springs to mind for me is at what day was your client notified of the hearing?
I can't answer that with any certainty, but there's no dispute that it met the statutory requirements. It has to be 20 working days after the end of the representation period. I think there's notification. You know what? You'll have a licensing officer who's far better qualified to answer that.
Yeah, no, I wondered if you off the top of your head, just with saying your instructions were come through on Monday. I was just interested to know the kind of timeline. Okay, Sergeant Booth.
It would have been. Sorry, if I could have just answered that. It would have been at least two, maybe 3 weeks ago. I would just add to that. I mean, from my point of view, Charles Holland messaged me tail end, not last week, the week before, and said he's got this referral, he can't deal with it, he's busy. I think we all know how busy Charles is at the moment. So he asked if I could do it. I don't know anything beyond that. I've not asked any questions beyond that. It may be that my client could answer them, but that's the positions as I know.
Thanks. Sergeant Booth.
Morning, Chair. Thank you. As Mr. Craig has already said, we've had a brief discussion this morning in respect of the additional material that has been sent through. I have very briefly cited that this morning, and there is a number of proposed conditions which I believe have been offered that have been set out in my representation. I would need just some time to consider that those 26 conditions are what would have been set out in my representation. In regards to the other material, I have mentioned to Mr. Craig, I don't feel that changes the police position in relation to Mr. Leung as the designated premises supervisor. As Mr. Craig has just highlighted, there would have to be considerations there for someone else to be put forward. I wouldn't be in a position to make a determination in respect of that today. Following, we would have to do due diligence checks. If you are minded to go for an adjournment, I have no concerns if you feel that is the right decision to make today in respect. I'm also ready, if you determine that we have a short adjournment, that we would proceed in light of the fact that the designated premises supervisor is not suitable from a police perspective. But as I say, if you feel that in the public interest it is beneficial to adjourn and allow Mr. Craig, who is representing the applicant, to come forward with an alternative DPS, and that is something that can be looked at in the forthcoming weeks. Again, I'm happy to go with your determination today.
Okay. Sandra, any observations?
Chair, yes, of course, it's at the panel's discretion whether or not to adjourn in the public interest. Just a couple of observations is it's not at the moment clear whether or not if we do have a short adjournment today, to consider, for the police to consider the conditions that have been, the additional conditions that have been proposed by the applicant. It's still not clear at the moment whether or not the police would say that those are still not sufficiently robust in their view, and they would still therefore continue to object in any event, or whether they will, having considered those, they will say, well, we think that those are now sufficiently robust, but our objection continues to be to the DPS, and then whether or not that then narrows down the issue and the matter should be adjourned in order to consider whether or not there should be another DPS. It's not possible for me to say. I don't know whether the police have any further comments on that, because it seems it may be that the police may be in a position to say that the operating schedule is now sufficiently robust once they've had a chance to consider the conditions. But as I say, they still would then they still object to the DPS. It's hard for me to say, Chair, whether or not, if the matter is adjourned, the DPS issue, if that is the outstanding issue, whether that can be resolved in the interim, or whether that's just going to be a fundamental problem for the police in any event, in which case there would necessarily be any point in adjourning.
Chair, just to clarify, as I said, there's nothing that would change my position today in respect of opposing the DPS. I have made Mr. Craig aware of that. And again, I don't know if there was an adjournment, whether that matter could be resolved. I'm not in a position to answer that until I know who else could be put forward, Chair. So unfortunately, but that is the position that I'm in today.
If I may answer that, I think there is a realistic prospect that can be resolved. I can't make any promises beyond that, but certainly based on the conversation I've had with the applicant about the police concerns about him being the DPS, and the way of resolving that is finding somebody who they consider is suitable. That would certainly provide a degree of resolution. That my instructions are that to explore that, and so that is what. If an adjournment of, say, for example, for 4 or 5 weeks was granted, then the applicant would use that period purposefully in order to find alternatives who were suitable to the police. Whether they are suitable is a matter for North Yorkshire Police, of course, but certainly in answering your question, I feel that that period of time could be used purposefully to address the police concerns. Whether it will is another matter, but certainly I think it could be used usefully. Yes, I do. I don't know if that assists you at all.
Chair, it may be that, Chair, you wish to move the panel into private session to consider in private.
I was just going to ask you that if we do this in private.
Because you've resolved, I think you've resolved under item 4 to move into private session in order to consider deliberate
Councillor
matters.
Pearson and Hook, you're happy with us to move into private session so the three of us can discuss this matter? Thank you. Brilliant. So if our technical team are able to help us facilitate moving us all around, that would be appreciated. And like I said, we're going to private session. We'll deliberate, and then we'll come back and let you know what our decision is for today.
So sorry, Councillor Mason, do we just stay here? Do we?
I think our tech people will put us into 2 rooms. I think you will go into 1 room and we'll go into another.
Thank you very much.
Right. Well, welcome back, everyone. And just for anybody that's been watching and been on hold, we've just been considering an application from the barrister who's representing the applicant to defer the hearing while some extra documents are digested and other discussions can take place. I think we're of the opinion that we'd like the police to have time to read the conditions this morning, so we can happy to give an hour. And I think at that point we'll be keen to hear from the police whether that materially changes their objections, further than just the DPS, around the operating schedule and those associated issues of what the objections relate to generally. I think at that point, if it does, and we're left with a single DPS issue, I think we'll probably be more minded to then adjourn it. If it isn't, I think we'll hear the full application today. So no pressure, Sergeant Booth. But hopefully that makes sense, and you're happy to kind of give us that feedback once you've had an hour to digest it.
Yes, Chair, that's appreciated. Thank you.
Brilliant. So if we can come back here for or virtually come back here for 11:30 or just before, the technical officers will be able to put us out into a breakout room. There'll be a message that goes on to the public, and we'll reconvene and then go back into a public session at 11:30.
For a technophobe like me, Councillor Mason, is it the same link as before?
You won't need to do anything. They'll like we've just happened. They'll
Very well.
they'll put us into
Thank
another
you.
room, and then you'll just turn your camera off and video off, and then turn it back on at past, and we'll all be there. Fingers
I'm very
crossed.
grateful. Thank you very much.
Problem. Right, we'll adjourn and we'll see you all back at 11:30. Thank you. Right, welcome back everybody. And again, just for the public's benefit, we've just had another break while we were reviewing some of the papers that have been submitted by the barrister representing the applicant to then make a decision based on some not advice, but some interpretation from the police of what their thoughts are after reading it. So Sergeant Booth, can you happy to share with us your kind of initial thoughts after reading that?
Hello, Chair. Thank you. Having considered the additional papers submitted this morning by Mr. Craig, and I'm grateful to him for submitting the additional conditions as part of the operating schedule. Certainly, if this was just a consideration in respect of the operating schedule, then North Yorkshire Police would have been happy to accept the 26 conditions, albeit for one, which was number 13, naming an individual to being excluded from the control and management. So outside of that condition, we would have felt that these offered by the applicant's solicitor do meet the criteria for robust conditions within a premises in the CIA. I have taken some further legal advice myself this morning in respect of the further documentation submitted, and it is the position of North Yorkshire Police that should the committee decide today to make an adjournment in respect of a DPS, it would not change our position. It would not satisfy the concerns that Mr. Leung, as the premises licence holder and a person involved in relation to this premises, along with the details and the additional information of other parties involved, that we believe that would still undermine the prevention of crime and disorder. So we are in a position to proceed this morning if you so choose to decide, and we know that is entirely a decision for members to make, but from the perspective of North Yorkshire Police, we are in that position. I have updated Mr. Craig in relation to that, and I shall hand back over to yourself, Chair.
Thank you, Sergeant. Mr. Craig, do you want to make any observations before we go back into a private session just to discuss what we've heard?
Yeah, what I'm about to say it's a matter for you, of course, may make the obviate the requirement to have the private session. Of course, it's still a matter for you, but certainly if the police's position is that, and they feel it can't be resolved by an alternative DPS being put forward by the premises, then it may well be for the best for all parties if we just cracked on today on that basis, because obviously they've had time as of you to consider the conditions that have been offered by way of the operating schedule. Clearly they'll have some observations on that, and I will too, but what seems to be the issue here is Mr. Leung himself. Well, that isn't going to change in the next month, and so my job really is to persuade you that he is, I suppose, using the old terminology, fit and proper, and that there are that he's going to promote the licensing objectives if the license is granted. And if the police's position isn't going to change, well, I just don't want to be wasting anybody's time, including my own, by kicking this can down the line, because I don't see any point in it, frankly. We may as well just get on with it and deal with the application as it stands now. So that's my view, but you may still want to deliberate with your colleagues, of course, Chair, but that's the applicant's position now, and I'm instructed to carry on today.
Thank you. Sandra, any observations? I mean, it sounds like to me, and I'm sure members will probably agree, that if that's the scenario outlined by both parties, we just progress with the application.
Chair, that would seem the sensible course based on what we've heard from both police and Mr. Craig.
Brilliant. Members, you're both happy that we proceed? Excellent. Right, Leslie, can I ask you to present the application?
Thank you, Chair. This is the application for the grant of a premise licence for 12 George Hudson Street, York, for a Chinese hot pot and barbecue restaurant. The licensable activities applied for are recorded music indoors, Monday to Sunday, 11 AM until 11 PM. The sale of alcohol on and off the premises, Monday to Sunday, 11 AM till 11 PM. And opening times, Monday to Sunday, 11 AM until 11 PM. A full copy of the application form and plans of the premises can be found at Annex 1 of the report, which is on pages 23 to 46. The premises is described in the application as a contactless restaurant run by robot waiters to reduce the risk of human-to-human contact due to the virus transmission risk. As part of the application, the operating schedule submitted by the applicant showing how the licensing objectives would be met can be found at page 18. The applicant has also provided an additional document which forms part of the application, which can be found at pages 43 and 44. I can confirm that this premises is located within the Community of Impact Policy area, and the assessment can be found at Annex 3, with Section 9 of the Statement of Licensing Policy at Annex 4. I can confirm that the consultation process was carried out correctly. North Yorkshire Police have made representation on the grounds that the licensing objectives, prevention of crime and disorder, and public nuisance will be undermined by the granting of this application, and the applicant fails to demonstrate how this application would not add to the cumulative impact of licensed premises already experienced within the Community of Impact area. Their representation can be found at Annex 5, pages 55 to 61 of the report. The police have submitted additional information which can be found in pages 71 to 111, currently marked as restricted pages within the report. A map showing the general area around the premises can be found at Annex 6. The committee has the following options when making your decision. Option 1, grant the licence in the terms applied for. Option 2, grant the licence with modified additional conditions imposed by the licensing committee. Option 3, grant the licence to exclude any of the licensable activities to which the application relates and add conditions accordingly. Option 4, reject the application. That's the report, Chair. I know that some members have mentioned that they aren't 100% sure which premises this is on George Hudson Street. It's the premises directly next door to Akbar restaurant. It's currently got a frontage, one of the big frontages that doesn't make it look like a vacant premises, and it has previously been offices used by the council before we all moved into West offices. I do have Google Maps open if you want me to share my screen and pull that up, but it is the premises directly next door to Akbar. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think we've sussed out which one it is, but what would be helpful if you've got an internal plan? Because we've obviously got one, but I don't know if you've got a different one that you could bring up on the screen just for us to have a look at. I know Councillor Hook was wondering if these were like kind of conveyor belts that food was delivered on. I don't know if the yourself or Mr. Craig can just maybe describe that physical layout for us.
That's the plan within the agenda, Chair, that's on the screen now. I think you would have to ask the applicant what the actual every part of the plan actually covers.
Okay, well, if I could just say, I haven't had the opportunity to visit the premises, which I ordinarily would like to do, but obviously, understandably, I'm sure everyone will understand that's not been possible for me. Kevin, do you want to just assist the hearing, if you will, in respect of the question that's been asked about conveyor belts?
Yes, I will.
Do you want to fire away?
Yep. The conveyor belts. Yeah. There will be some dish served onto conveyor belt for the customers to choose from.
So they'll kind of just be moving around all the time, and you will just pick what you want, or it'll be you order it and
Yeah,
it comes to you.
Yeah, there are two different operations. Yeah, one you can order it by yourself, and there's some special recommendations we put on the conveyor belt. If customers wish to try, they can do.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions, members? Okay. Thank you, Leslie. That's helpful. Right, Mr. Craig, have you got any questions of the licensing officer?
Well, I have three preliminary, very brief. Don't worry, I'm not going to take up too much of your time, but I do have three preliminary points. First one, Chair, just if I may, you've all had the opportunity to read the documents I've sent in, have you? Just to be clear. Fantastic. That's number one. Number two, I did note, and I've only just noticed actually, on page 20, the options that are available under paragraphs 21 through to 25. It's just something to raise now because I don't want to ambush your legal advisor at the end. I've just gone and checked section 18 of the Licensing Act, and obviously this is a live issue now, which is why I've gone to check. I feel like a proper lawyer this morning, actually looking at some law. Section 18(4) bracket C. You have the power to refuse to specify a person in the license as the premises supervisor. I just don't see that on the options that are available to you. And it may well be that you want to take legal advice on that, because my position is going to be that you can exclude the applicant as the DPS, and he can then, and how that would work, obviously, if the license was granted in those circumstances, no sale of alcohol could be lawfully authorised until a DPS was in place, and that North Yorkshire Police would have the power to object to that under the normal circumstances, although in order to be fair and right here, those circumstances, I'm sure you're aware, Chair, are exceptional for that to happen. It happens occasionally. I probably do one, maybe two DPS hearings a year. They're pretty rare. So I'm just inviting you to just, I'll be making that submission. It's right, the police are aware I'm going to make that submission, and it may well be you want to take legal advice on that. The third question, I just need to know, because it does vary from one local authority to another. I know you have a 15-minute time limit, and I just wondered how rigidly that was enforced. Because I know at Leeds, it's like, that's it, your time's done, good night. But at Birmingham, they're not quite as strict at Birmingham. For example, there are other local authorities as well.
I think I'm fair. I think, 15 minutes is the guide.
Okay.
Don't go on longer than you need to, and try and keep it to that. And obviously we'll be exactly the same with the police in terms of, rigidity. We'll treat you both fairly.
Thank you. As long as there's not going to be a red flashing light after 14 and a half minutes and I've got to try and cram everything else in the last 30 seconds.
I won't cut you off, but you know what the limit is. So try and work to it.
Do my best. I will definitely do my best to stick to that. Yeah. Yes, well, I'm ready to make the application if you wish, Chair.
Okay, we just need to go through everyone else. Sergeant Booth, any questions of the licensing officer?
No, Chair, thank you.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Brilliant stuff. Yeah, right, Mr. Craig, please do. You've got 15 minutes, then obviously there's the chance for questions from the police and from members.
Right, very well, thank you. Right, I'll do it in this particular order. The applicant himself, one of the concerns that the police have raised is in relation to his experience. That was one of the concerns that was raised, and following that, I asked him to get a CV together. It's frequently the case, certainly within certain communities, that CVs perhaps aren't as commonplace. Written CVs aren't as commonplace. But you can see from that he has a significant level of experience. In fact, the first restaurant on there, the Leung, I was telling Kevin when I saw him, I first went to that restaurant in 1978, believe it or not, when I was 8 years of age. So it's a lot of well-established, well-known restaurants that he's been a restaurant manager of. As you've heard, this is a unusual offering, but let me just put one or two people's minds at rest. Any ordering will go through a human being. It won't be that people order, because clearly there's concerns around Challenge 25 and sales to minors in relation to that. So the sale will take place via human interaction, and that, including that, will be any age verification checks, and then food and food only will be served by robots. I haven't seen any of these robots. I don't know what they look like. I don't know if they're any good, but that's the nature of the operation. And clearly, at the moment, I'm not going to labour this point. That's not a huge consideration for you, but I guess any reduction in human contact is something broadly to be welcomed. This is a relatively modest application in terms of the scope of hours. I did take instructions on this point today, actually. Quite frankly, there's no need, in my view, and again, you'll take legal advice on this, for you to consider the issue of regulated entertainment. The hours applied for the sale of alcohol are till 2300 hours. As I'm sure most people in this hearing are aware, the Live Music Act deregulated regulated entertainment, and any premises, whether it's a workplace or a licensed premise, can provide what otherwise would be regulated entertainment up to 11 o'clock at night for less than 500 people. And Kevin said to me that the type of music will be playing in background music. So actually, if you want to exclude regulated entertainment from the scope of the application, that's not going to make any difference materially to him. And it may well be that gives you a level of comfort around public nuisance, although I don't think public nuisance is a principal consideration for you today. I have included, as you have seen, a number of conditions. I'm not going to, given the time afforded to me, I don't propose to go through those, and I'm very grateful. I think Jackie's been very fair in that regard. I'm very grateful for the indication from her. I'm perhaps a little relieved as well. The indication from her that the conditions are of a satisfactory nature, given the nature of the location of the premises. And let me say that in relation to that, more generally, I have to concede on Kevin's behalf that this application wasn't good enough. I said that before, but that wasn't in the hearing. In fact, the gentleman who did the application was, I don't think there's any reason I can't tell you this, he was proposed by him by the gentleman who made the application, Mr. Chen, back in October. Sorry, it was September. Forgive me, in September. So that's not unusual. People frequently, word of mouth, look, this guy will do this application for you. But the application simply isn't good enough on a number of levels. What purports to be conditions in the operating schedule aren't enforceable. They're vague. They're woolly. And so I just thought, let's just put a line through that. There's one or two things in there that have been suggested, and so I've adopted those as conditions. And so the proposed conditions that are before you, numbered 1 to 26, are the revised operating schedule in its entirety. So whatever's on the operating schedule now, just put a line through it, because quite frankly, other than explaining the style of the operation from a condition point of view, I don't think they comply with the requirements as set out in 1.16 of the Section 182 guidance, which says conditions need to be precise, enforceable, capable of being met, relevant to the licensing objectives. But I would submit these conditions are. These conditions also take into account the location of the premises, and the Section 182 guidance is very clear on that certain types of premises have less of an impact than others. I think the examples they use in the 182 guidance are nightclubs and cafes and theatres at opposite ends of the scale. Well, this, I would suggest, a restaurant falls more towards the cafes and restaurants side of things than a nightclub. I don't think that's a controversial point I'm advancing there. And there are a number of conditions in there. Clearly, I'll just take you through them. Page 1, incident book, refusal register. Page 2, training. They're all comprehensive. Not only do they relate to the requirement for the premises to undertake those things, but also to retain records and make them available upon inspection. In addition to that, within the police representations, there were a number of suggested, that's not right, that's not fair. There were a number of conditions that they said would have been an aspiration for them on the application. And so I've taken that on board and effectively adopted all of those. I've reworded 1 or 2 of them very slightly, just because I think it makes them a bit more enforceable. it's not a criticism. I'm a lawyer. I'm bound to change the odd thing. Otherwise, I don't feel I'm justifying my fee. So, but certainly conditions 8 through to 11 are all restaurant conditions that in some respects mirror the old table meal ancillary to the sale of alcohol conditions under the 1964 Act. So they all add a layer of, I guess, future-proofing to these premises, but also, you know, a requirement that they can only operate as a conventional restaurant. And so clearly that of itself is a step that significantly mitigates any potential cumulative impact. In addition, again, I can see the application was deficient because there was no reference to opening times in the application. And whilst not strictly a licensable activity, the case of Thwaites is clear that that's a consideration for you. And so rather than, I can't really amend the application in its paper form, what I've done is provided at condition 12, which was a suggestion of the police, for 30 minutes drinking up time. So the premises will then, if you do grant the license, have to be closed by 11:30. I then move on to condition 13. I hope I'm not talking too quickly, by the way, but I'm just trying to fire through everything. Condition 13, clearly from the police representations, it doesn't take a genius to work out that the police have concerns around Lee Chen, or Mr. Chen. Can I just say that I should have also put Wei Lin Chen and Zhong Li Chen, Wei Li Chen and Yang Tong Feng on their names as well. And there's certainly no issue with their names being included on that condition, because I know that police have concerns about those individuals. That doesn't mean those concerns have been addressed. I'm not trying to create that impression, otherwise I wouldn't be sat here talking now. But certainly there's no issue with those two names going on there as well. Rationale behind this condition, I've been down this route before, particularly with appeals. You simply cannot lawfully exclude somebody from a building that they have an interest in property in. You've got Article 1, Protocol 1 issues. It simply isn't lawful to do that. The Licensing Act is restricted to the scope of its own activities, and you can't say to somebody, you can't come into your property. So a condition like that would not be lawful in my view. And so what I've sought to do with that condition is exclude that individual and those other individuals from the operation, management, running or control of the licensed premises. You could even make reference to licensable activities in there, but I believe all those words deal with everything that they could conceivably be involved in that the police wouldn't want them to be involved in. While I'm discussing this particular condition, I will briefly touch on Mr. Leung's involvement in the Regency, because I think it's relevant at this stage for me to bring that up. It's right that he was a restaurant manager for a considerable time at these premises. He worked about 30 hours a week. He was dipping in and out of the premises. He was at no point involved in any recruitment, and clearly that's important given the issue around people with no entitlement to work in the UK. He simply acted there as a restaurant manager, in the sense he ran the floor, he managed the waiting staff, he had control. He was a head waiter, I suppose, in that sense of you, a manager who was running the waiting operation. That was the limit of his involvement in the premises. And clearly why that's important. The police understandably have concerns about people in the background, or they perceive to be in the background. And look, there's no point me trying to deny the fact that these people, A, own the freehold through a company, and B, were involved in applying for a license at these premises. So it would be utterly foolish of me to try and suggest that there isn't some form of connection there. But Kevin has been very clear to me from the very first moment we spoke that he has worked for himself. Sorry, he's worked for other people for a long time. When the previous application was refused, he was approached by them whether he wanted to run it. He wants to run his own business. He believes it's the time is right. He's not going to get an opportunity like this again. And so he wants to do it. But he's been absolutely clear to me from the outset. You'll clearly have questions for him, but he does not want any involvement from any outside interference or involvement from anybody else if this license is granted. So clearly you'll make your own mind up about that and about him, but certainly that's his absolutely express, unequivocal position that he's stated to me on a number of occasions. He has signed a lease. You've seen that. It's right to say that's pretty much an off-the-shelf lease. And one of the things that happened when I had the meeting with him last week was that he said that to me that the landlord had said to him he didn't have to pay any rent until he could open again. Well, that was something that had been delivered on a handshake, shall we say, and word of mouth. And I asked for him to secure that commitment from them in writing to protect him as much as anything else. So that's why you have that letter from the director of the landlord company saying that they won't charge him any rent until such a time as the premises can lawfully open. When that's going to be, I guess we'll all be guessing at that, but it certainly ain't going to be any time in the next a couple of weeks. So in terms of the visits that took place to the Regency where Kevin was present, he accepts he was present on those occasions, but it's right to say he wasn't the DPS, he wasn't the licence holder, he had no formal involvement in the carrying on of licensable activities at the Regency, and that's certainly a point I'll be making to you at the end, that it simply, in my view, can't be right that somebody, just because they have are employed at particular premises, that should hinder them of itself from securing a license in their name. I've spoken to Kevin, he's never been in trouble with the police, and I don't doubt for a second if that was the case, that would be before you. He has held a personal license since November 2005, in fact, when they were first issued. So he's held that for some time with no issues in relation to that. And so again, that's something that you can quite properly take into account. And so in terms of one or two matters, I mean, look, his address wasn't correct. It's in the papers, the evidence of the representations, objections of North Yorkshire Police. His address on his personal licence wasn't correct. I mean, that is absolutely correct, and I would just make the 2 points in relation to that. Firstly, I've never known anybody be prosecuted for that in 8 years of practice, and in addition to that, it's pretty common for people who hold personal licences that haven't changed there. And I'm sure your officers will be nodding knowingly. That happens all the time. So I'm not trying to excuse that in any way, but I don't think this application turns on the fact he hadn't changed his address on his personal license. That's just, I know people quite close to home who are in that position actually. So it's not ideal, but it certainly isn't anything that I think you can hang this decision on. I just make a few more points. I know my 15 minutes is there or thereabouts, so but I'm very grateful you just give me a little bit more time. He hasn't, I mean, he's not been able to, I know one of the criticisms of the previous application, because unfortunately, the decision notice is actually contained at the beginning of the agenda pack, so I had the opportunity to read that as part of this. One of the issues was he hadn't engaged with the responsible authorities. Well, I suppose to some extent that criticism could be levied at him here, but he has had a meeting with them on site. I know that they did a site visit, and clearly he made efforts to come and see me at my chambers in a socially distant way, I would add, very much so, in a big room, one way away from each other. But just events of last week with my brother and everything else meant that I wasn't able to engage with the police as early as I would have liked, but certainly that was something that I otherwise would have been in a position to do Tuesday or Wednesday of last week. So I think he has engaged or tried to engage with responsible authorities. It's worth making the point, just a couple of more general points. There's nothing preventing Kevin, if you refuse the application today, there's nothing preventing him opening his doors anyway. There's nothing preventing him opening a restaurant and telling people to bring their own alcohol along, consumption not being a licensable activity. And I would just invite you to consider that in the context of what I'm asking you to do here, which is grant the application. It may be, given what the police have said, that you think it's appropriate not to put Kevin on as the DPS. I believe you have the power to do that based on my interpretation of Section 18, and so and just would have to then find somebody that North Yorkshire Police were happy with. But if you grant this application, what it does is it brings him within the regulatory framework much more so than if he otherwise didn't hold a licence. There are still legal requirements that are placed upon him, like risk assessment, fire risk assessment, things under the Health and Safety and Work Act. But notwithstanding that, what you would have here is a regulatory framework whereby if there wasn't compliance, then that's potentially capable of being a criminal offence under Section 136 of the Licensing Act. So to that extent, you can have a much greater overview of these premises should this licence be granted. I make the point that on the previous application, and the hours applied for here are less than that. On the previous application, there were other representations from other responsible authorities. That's not the case here. It's not an overwhelming point, I'll concede that, because you're here to deal with the representation that's before you. But for whatever reason, your licensing authority haven't seen fit to do that. It's certainly not a criticism, it's a matter for them, but I'm just making that point on behalf of the applicant. So the position is this. I would submit, I'm very grateful for the indication from the police, North Yorkshire Police, about the operating schedule, save for condition 13. And I just make the point about that what I'm saying to you is, they might not agree with this, but I would say, first of all, you've got to make your mind up about Kevin, because there are obviously concerns raised, which I think, I'm not trying to put words in North Yorkshire Police's mouth here. I'm sure Jackie's more than capable of speaking for herself, and will do shortly. I just make the point that this application is what you have here is a man who really, it's up to you to decide whether he is sufficiently distant from these people and whether he deserves an opportunity, and whether you think he's being straight with you in that regard. And certainly based on my dealings with him, that's the impression I've formed. Clearly, I'm not professionally obligated to mislead a committee, but equally, I suppose I'm going to be a bit biased because I'm putting his case across. But certainly, he has, at no point has resisted any suggestions of these people being excluded, and I think he just wants an opportunity to run his own restaurant in what are going to be hugely challenging times for the licensed trade, and particularly in tourist towns like York. And Matt, please don't take that as me saying that you've got to grant this application because of tough times. I'm just making the point on his behalf that he wants that opportunity. Just briefly going through your statement of licensing policy, a few small points.
I was going to say you're definitely running over now. If you can try and wind it up in the next minute or so.
I'll do that in the next minute. Obviously, you'll be taking this case on its own merits. I believe the cumulative impact policy has been addressed by the points that have been made. And so I would just invite you to grant the application as it now stands, and please allow Kevin to have the opportunity of making something of his life. And that was less than a minute, but more than 15 in total, I'm sure. And I'm very grateful to that. That's the application. Thank you.
Mr. Craig. Sergeant Booth, do you have any questions of the applicant's solicitor, barrister?
No, Chair, thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Hook, any questions? Councillor Pearson?
Thanks. I was just going to ask about off sales. Is that the right point to ask about that?
Yeah.
Just wondering, is that imperative to the operation? If it is meant to be as a restaurant, are off sales crucial?
I think Kevin probably needs to answer that, but let Kevin answer it, and then if I feel I need to fill in, I'll fill in.
Okay.
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, if you can address Councillor
Hello.
Pearson's question just about having off sales and if that's important for your business model.
No, it won't be off sale. It's going to be on sale on the premises. Only can be served with the meal.
Yeah, part of your
Does
application
that
does
answer the
ask to.
question?
Yeah, part of your application does say about selling alcohol off the premises, so people could maybe come in and buy a bottle of wine, but it's going to be in a sealed container. Is that something you would have any? Is that something that's key to your business model, or you wouldn't mind if that wasn't on there?
It wasn't on there. I don't mind at all.
Okay.
Basically, I just need to run the restaurant. If people, I mean, with the meal, a lot of people will love to have some alcohol with it. Yeah, that's the main point. Yeah, of the restaurant.
What I would say, Chair, I've not had any direct instructions, but I think I can take it as read that I'm getting instructions. You can remove off sales from the scope of the license, and all I would invite you to do is then consider the conditions that are proposed in association with off sales, which perhaps you might deem to be OTOs, because frankly, there's no point in having conditions about off sales if there aren't any off sales. So I'll just make that point, but certainly based on what Kevin's just said, you can remove off sales from the scope of the application, and I amend the application accordingly forthwith.
Thanks. One thing from me, you said that he's never going to have an opportunity like this again. What did you mean by that that phrase?
Well, I suppose perhaps I was descending a little bit into hyperbole, but just making the point, he's no spring chicken. I don't think you'll mind me saying he's 57 years of age. He's never had his own business before. I think it's unlikely, I think that's fair, it's unlikely that another opportunity like this would present itself to someone of that age and lack of, look, you may or may not know, probably don't, I'm sure you don't know this, but I had my own bars and restaurants for a number of years, and getting your first restaurant is really hard. Once you've got one under your belt, all of a sudden people seem to want to talk to you a lot more. But certainly getting my first restaurant was really, really hard, because getting people to, you've got to get people to give you a premises, and I suppose getting the funding from the bank is difficult. Where he's fortunate in this instance is the fact that this is already a kitted out restaurant that's got all the it's got, I never had any robots in any of my restaurants. He's got robots to deliver the food. So in that sense, his capital outlay is low. He's walking into something that's ready made. He's obviously paying fairly chunky rent at 45k. But I don't think I'm doing him any disservice here to say at his stage in life, it is unlikely that somebody is going to turn around at any point and go, here you go, have a restaurant. You pay me rent and you run it yourself. That's what I meant by that. And I'm sorry if.
No, I just wanted to tease out that there was nothing else.
No.
There was sitting behind that.
No,
and then obviously the other one was you kind of described his role at the Regency as a kind of head waiter. I think was probably one of the words you used.
Along
obviously,
those lines. I mean, can I just say, sorry, Chair, I don't want to cut across you, but
yeah,
he was called the manager. There's no dispute about that. I was just describing his role as much as anything, as he's told me. So I'll just make that point. But you'll obviously have a question about it.
It was just obviously when you look at then his CV that was included, does go on to include things around training staff and general operations and things. And it was just maybe an observation more than anything to say, how did he see his role? You've obviously described it in one way, but was that how he saw his role?
I think Kevin probably would be best if Kevin answered that himself as well. Kevin, do you want to?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'm taking over. Yeah. Yeah, because yes, can I?
Yeah, just
sorry.
Yeah. Role, Kevin, please.
Yeah, can I go ahead? Yeah.
Please.
Every restaurant runs differently. Yeah, but the way sorry. Yep. Can I carry on? Yep.
Yeah. Sorry, I think there must be an issue with the connection.
Can everybody hear me? Yeah, maybe it's not stable. Yeah. I said every restaurant runs or managed differently, yeah. But my role in the Regency basically is as I said, I'm based on quality and the service of the restaurant. It's like front of house, and then I provide trainings for the staff, the floor staff basically, and basically I don't get involved with recruitment, administration, nothing at all. As I described to Duncan as well, yeah. You can even call me a head waiter. But
Thank you.
I do have the experience of managing restaurants.
Thank you. That's appreciated. Right, I think that's everything in terms of that. So, Sergeant Booth, if you want to present your case, and again, around 15 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Members of the committee, you will have had sight and considered the representations made on behalf of North Yorkshire Police, including the additional material of the witness statements of Glyn Jones, Immigration Officer, Helen Sefton, Senior Licensing Officer at York, PC Hollis and myself. Those officers are all available today should any participants wish to query any aspects of the evidence provided from their additional material. North Yorkshire Police have objected to this application for a premises licence on the grounds that the prevention of crime and disorder and the prevention of public nuisance would be undermined for the following reasons. This is the second application for a premises in respect of 12 George Hudson Street, the previous application being submitted and heard before a committee of your peers on the 9th of November. Upon receiving the application from the current applicant, Mr. Leung, I contacted him at the premises he was currently working at, which was the Regency on Barbican Road in York. What was alarming was that at that time of the meeting, Mr. Leung advised me and PC Hollis, and I would refer you to our witness statements on page 74 and page 79, that he was unaware of a previous application, but that he had completed this application himself, even though he was unable to advise us of the content of specifically what was in it. But we will have heard today from his legal representative that he did not in fact complete that application. It was completed by Mr. Wenlin Chen, who was the previous applicant in respect of the application that was heard on the 9th of November. I am grateful to the applicant's solicitor for addressing my concerns and my representation in respect of the conditions that would be appropriate for a premises in the CIA cumulative impact area. And I think we have discussed those conditions at length this morning. And obviously Mr. Craig has gone over those. There is nothing that has been offered within that to enhance the operating schedule that I would now have any concerns or objections in relation to, albeit bar condition 13, which names Mr. Zhong Li Chen as being excluded. There are a number of other applicants associated with, I believe, this premises licence application that gives me cause for concern, which would undermine the prevention of crime and disorder licensing objective. The further concerns, taking aside the operating schedule in respect of this licensing application, are that the police do not support the applicant, Mr. Leung, as the DPS. The Section 182 guidance, para 2.5 states it will normally be the responsibility of the premises licence holder as an employer and not the licensing authority to ensure that managers appointed at the premises are competent and appropriately trained. And I think obviously Mr. Craig was highlighting that point as part of his submissions. What I believe are exceptional circumstances in this case are in respect of Mr. Leung as both the premises licence holder and the DPS as to why he is not suitable to hold a premises licence. It is both relevant and proportionate that as members of the committee, you have all the available information to make a determination on an application. The police are the licensing authority's main source of advice on matters relating to the promotion of the crime and disorder licensing objective. As such, the information contained in the witness statements of Helen Sefton, Glyn Jones, PC Hollis and myself is relevant and provide exceptional circumstances pointing out why Mr. Leung is unsuitable to be the DPS. Summarising that information, Mr. Young was present on the following occasions working as the General Manager with responsibility for the Regency Barbican Road, York, whilst it was open to members of the public. On the 8th of September 2017, he was present when 6 persons were removed by immigration. He was present when there was a breach of premise licence conditions. It is important for the committee to also consider that he is a personal licence holder and would be aware and familiar with the premise licence conditions. At that time, staff training was not documented. He has mentioned today that he did have responsibility in front of house for training provided. Also at that time, there was no access to the CCTV. On the 6th of September 2019, he was also present when 3 persons were removed by immigration. In fact, Helen Sefton, the Senior Licensing Officer at York, spent a period of time going through the premise licence conditions as he informed her that he was the person responsible for the operating at that time. Again, premise licence conditions including no CCTV, no documented staff training records, and no refusals, registers or incident report book. No notices asking persons to leave quietly, and no noise management plan. At this time, Mr. Leung produced his personal licence, which was found to have committed offences by him not notifying the licensing authority of his change of address. Helen Sefton pointed this out to him, and she herself undertook due diligence to ensure that she contacted his issuing licensing authority. On the 24th of October 2019, some 6 weeks after the initial visit by licensing authority officers, immigration and police further attended the premises to check compliance with premise licence conditions. Again, Mr. Leung was present and notified PC Hollis that he was the responsible person in charge whilst the premises was open and operating to members of the public. At that time, no staff training records were in date. There was no incident book. There was no notice asking patrons to be quiet and respect neighbours. And again, the CCTV was not working. Following this, he was issued a Section 19 notice, which has been submitted as part of the police representation in respect of this application. The notice was issued personally to Mr. Leung. On the 2nd of December 2020, at the time of my visit to speak with Mr. Leung in respect of this application, he was also operating the Regency Barbican Road. At that time, he informed PC Hollis and myself that he was the operations manager and had been responsible for the reopening of the premises following the recent lockdown that had taken place in November 2020. Having discussed the current application, given it was the first day after lockdown, I checked the premise licence conditions were in compliance. And at that time, I again found that there was no documented staff training records, with the last training record being from the 25th of October 2019, which was when PC Hollis had attended and actually issued the Section 19 notice. Mr. Leung holds a personal licence, states he's fully aware of the 4 licensing objectives, but yet has committed criminal offences under Section 127 by failing to update his personal licence, and further offences of 136 permitting unauthorised licensable activities as recently as December 2020, yet he claims and has produced a CV to say that he is an experienced and well-trained manager and fully understands the licensing objectives. The exceptional circumstances in respect of Mr. Leung highlighted above demonstrate he is not deemed to be a responsible person to hold the role of DPS and manage a premises to uphold the licensing objectives, given his failure to do that at other premises in York, which have had their premises licence revoked. Whilst no criminal charges have been brought against him, he has been present when those offences have taken place as the general manager. He is either continuing to work with the persons who at that time were the premise licence holders and whom against action was taken, and the police believe that if he is the premises licence holder or DPS, this would seriously undermine the crime prevention licensing objective. Section 18.9 of the Licensing Act states that the requirements of this subsection are that representations were made by Chief Officer of Police for a police area in which the premises are situated, and include a statement that due to the exceptional circumstances of the case, he is satisfied that the designation of the person concerned as the premises supervisor under the premises licence would undermine the crime prevention objective. I am designated, as you will see from my witness statement, to act and respond to all applications on behalf of the Chief Constable of North Yorkshire Police, and have made a statement in respect of those circumstances, which you will have a chance to obviously view. And if you have any further questions, I am willing to take those today. Members of the committee, alongside the police, concerns around Mr. Leung. I appreciate that Mr. Craig this morning has highlighted that an alternative DPS could be put forward in respect of this premises. However, from the additional material that has been submitted by the applicant solicitor this morning, the police believe that Mr. Leung is a cloak for persons who have previously associated with premises that have had their licences revoked, and by his own admissions at the time, he has stated that he has not invested in this company, that he is employed to operate the premises only. At this moment in time, Chair, I just want to call one of my witnesses, which is Helen Sefton, the Senior Licensing Officer at York, please.
Yeah, of course.
Morning,
Helen,
Jackie.
can you hear me?
I can.
Helen, in respect of the witness statement that you have provided in respect of attending the Regency on Barbican Road and your previous engagement with Mr. Leung, we've heard this morning as part of his submissions that at that time he stated he was potentially in the role, or describes his role as that of head waiter. Obviously, in your witness statement, you have gone through, particularly in respect of the most recent visit on the September 2019, where you've actually gone through all the premise license conditions. And you've mentioned at that time that the DPS, Mr. Chen, was not there and that Mr. Leung would be addressing those conditions breaches that you pointed out to him. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Did he say that he was the one that would generally be in charge and responsible for ensuring staff training and documenting that at the time?
Yes, I believe I discussed staff training with Mr. Leung on both visits, the one in 2017 and the one in 2019. And although nothing was ever documented, he did state that he would be the person who would train staff.
Okay, and just in respect of his personal license at the time, can you advise what was the reasons for him not updating the licensing authority? Was he aware of his obligations in respect of that?
I believe I can't say why he didn't update it, but when he showed me his personal license, he immediately said the address on the personal license is incorrect, and he needed to change that. And I said to him at the time, are you aware that it is an offence not to tell your licensing authority you've moved house, and you must do that as soon as possible? Those were my words. So I don't know why he didn't, but he did seem to say that he was aware he should have.
Okay, that's lovely. I've got no further questions, Chair, from Helen. Thank you very much. And on that note, I will finish my submissions. If there are any questions, as I say, to any of my other witnesses or to myself, I'm happy to take those.
Thank you. Mr. Craig, have you got any questions of Sergeant Booth?
Yeah, just a couple, if I may. First of all, have you, Sergeant Booth, I'm going to use some vernacular. You'll know what I'm saying. Have you done a PNC check on the applicant at all?
I have, and obviously, as I've said, there are, I believe, exceptional circumstances in that he was present but not prosecuted in respect of any offences that took place.
So, all right, but just to be clear, he doesn't have any convictions at all.
That's correct.
You've made reference to him not been prosecuting. I'm slightly curious. If he's not the DPS and he's not the licence holder, how is he capable of carrying on any licensable activities under the Licensing Act? I don't understand how anyone could be in those circumstances.
He personally identified as being the person that was running the premises when those visits were taking place. He said that he was responsible, he was operating the premises at those times, and I think that is documented in both my witness statement and that of Helen Sefton.
And just to be clear on that, there's no suggestion he has been the DPS there at any point?
None whatsoever. That's perfectly clear. And as I say, we have taken the action against other parties in respect of those premises. Okay.
When you say taken action against other parties, what, 136 prosecutions?
The result was to seek a review of the premises licence.
Right. No criminal proceedings.
No criminal proceedings. No.
Thank you. And lastly, would it be right to say, actually, no, I've got two more questions. Would it be right to say you've had presumably some dealings with the Chens? Limited, you must have had some interaction with them.
That's correct, yes.
Would it be right to say that they're the type of people who tend to run and control the businesses overall themselves? They tend to, the decision making tends to rest with them. Would that be a fair comment?
In my professional experience of though, they are people that have been involved in the operating of licensed premises. I can't speak on behalf of other businesses, but I'm aware of them from operating licensed premises.
And within those licensed premises, would it be right to say, you might not be able to answer it, I'm actually asking a question that, the first thing you're told not to do at bar school, I'm actually asking a question I don't quite know what the answer is going to be, but based on your dealings with them, would it be fair to say, within the context of holding licenses and their involvement in the licence trade, that they tend to, the decision making rests with them. They tend to keep that amongst themselves. They call the shots. Would that be a fair comment to say that?
I think they have demonstrated from my professional experience of them that whilst they have been the premise license holder or the DPS, that they have failed to take responsibility to have involvement with the premises. That's been my experience of them.
Just lastly, on just if I could just ask Helen Sefton, if I may. Helen, would it be fair, would it be reasonable to say that personal license holders not changing their address when they move house, it's not an uncommon occurrence, is it?
It's not uncommon, no.
Right, thank you very much. And no more questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hook, have you got any questions? Councillor Pearson?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'm interested in this idea. Are the police in general okay with the licence? It's just the DPS that presents an issue.
So in response to that question, the applicant, Mr. Leung, is both the premises licence holder and the DPS. From the additional information that has been provided this morning, and through my discussions with him, I believe that he is actually a front man in respect of the Chen family, and given the revocation of their recent licences, I feel that they've put him forward. As Mr. Craig has rightly said, he is a person that has not been convicted of any criminal offences. I believe he is a person that they are using in order to open a premises licence, and feel that because he does not have any criminal convictions and that they are potentially the investors and the main stakeholders in respect of this business, my concern still stands that as a premises licence holder, he would be involved with those individuals, which would undermine the prevention of crime and disorder licensing objective, given their history.
Thank you.
Thanks. No questions from me, I don't think, at this point. Obviously, how the system works now, Sergeant Booth, is it's back to you to sum up your case. So you've got another opportunity to do that. Obviously, I'm sure you probably won't need the full 5 minutes, but it's over to you, and then obviously back to Mr. Craig finally.
Thank you, Chair. As stated, I think I have highlighted the fact that the police have got concerns in respect of Mr. Leung being both the premises licence holder and DPS, given that he has first alluded to say that he was unaware of a previous application. He then told us initially he completed this application. We've today heard that he didn't complete this application that's been completed by the previous applicant. That previous applicant, Mr. Wenlin Chen, is associated and has had premises license revoked at 2 other premises in the city of York. And the question for members is whether they deem that Mr. Leung is actually a person that is going to have any control of these premises, is going to be able to operate these premises to promote the licensing objectives. Is he going to be able to ensure that premise license conditions are adhered to and enforced? And I think from a police perspective, we feel that his track record has demonstrated that he has not adhered to premise license conditions. He is a personal license holder, is trained and received a certificate under the Licensing Act. So he is fully aware of what compliance with licensing conditions are. And I think from that perspective, we would ask the members of the committee to consider whether you deem him a fit and responsible person to hold the premises licence and be the DPS. And for that reason, we would ask that the application is refused. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Craig, over to you. Same 5 minutes for you to summarise your case.
Yeah, probably won't need 5 minutes either, but I'm grateful for the indication. And just dealing on, if I may, on the issue of the application. First of all, I just want to correct one thing that Sergeant Booth has said. I never said that the application had been completed by the previous applicant. I said it'd been completed by a Mr. Alan Mann, who was the interpreter, who I understand is a licensing agent of I've never heard of him, but that's my understanding. He completed the application, and I did ask Kevin what he meant when he said he had completed the application. What he meant was he's read through it and made amendments. So I think he literally meant completed as in finalised it. But look, what we're not dealing with is the application as it stood when it had been submitted. We're dealing with it now, and I would submit he's made a number of steps to address the concerns. And really, this does. I think North Yorkshire Police and the applicant are agreed on this, is you have to make your mind up based on seeing the whites of Mr. Leung's eyes and hearing him speak, and the fact he's actually got a lease on the premises, and he's not tried to hide the fact that the previous people are involved. Because look, they've had an application rejected by you, rightly so, I would say. What are they supposed to do? They've got a property there. They've got to do something with it. It's kitted out restaurant. Properties are not selling at the moment, not commercial properties, that's for sure. So I don't think they could be criticised for that. They can perhaps be criticised for the way they run a licensed business, but you can't criticise them for wanting to offload the premises to somebody else. You've got a condition there that I'm proposing deals with all those three individuals. You've got sanctions, and the police have got sanctions under the review process. This is a low risk venue. And what you don't have, I'll just make two final points. First of all, just because he wasn't involved in the license, he wasn't actively involved as a DPS, he wasn't a license holder, and I don't think it's right that he's punished for the fact he's worked somewhere. That means he's not going to get an opportunity. He's a man of good character in the sense he's got no criminal convictions. The fact is he wasn't prosecuted for any offence, and that you could take that on its face, and in that sense he's as good a standing as myself, for example. I've never been prosecuted for offence. Well, it's the same. Well, driving offences, but that's slightly different. But I just make the point that this gentleman here, this applicant, is somebody who is 57 years of age. He's not some wide boy who's just turned up out the blue. The fact he's worked there a long time. He's not some shadowy person in the background. I think that his version of events is, I've worked in restaurants for a long time. I'm getting an opportunity here, and I want to take it, and I don't want them to have anything to do with it. And it really is down to whether you accept that or not. But I don't think you have anything before you, save for the fact he's worked at the other premises and he happened to be there when they came in, to support the fact that he is connected in the way that North Yorkshire Police are trying to imply. So given all the safeguards that are in there, and given the fact if you want to exclude him as DPS, so there's an extra layer, there's somebody else in there, you can do that. I believe you've got that power. I invite you to grant the application. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, Councillor Hook, have you got any kind of final clarifications you want to make? Councillor Pearson? No. Okay. Sandra, is there any observations, any legal advice you want to give us before we go into private session?
Chair, no legal advice at this stage, but may I just clarify something, please, if I understood correctly? Did Sergeant Booth say at the outset of the hearing that so far as the conditions are concerned, the police are satisfied with the conditions, save for condition 13? Did I hear that correctly? And if so, has Mr. Craig addressed those concerns with his proposed amendment to that condition? I wasn't sure about that point, Chair.
Chair, just in relation to Sandra's comments, the further operating schedule that was submitted detailing the 26 conditions, we would accept those, albeit number 13 that you've mentioned, they are not in question or objected to.
Sorry, I'm not quite clear. Are you saying that you object to condition 13?
Yes, condition 13 in respect of Mr. Zhong Li Chen, and I think Mr. Craig addressed that as part of his submissions in respect of he would add further names to that. What we're saying is that is not the whole background of people involved, but the other conditions certainly would meet the requirements of something that the police would seek in the CIA area for licensed premises.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Just looking at the time, and obviously I'm keen with these things that we do retire, make a decision and come back and deliver it today. So I think if we initially give ourselves a period of 30 minutes, and then obviously if we're not in a position to make a decision by that, we can give you another. Yes, Sandra?
Sorry, Chair, to interrupt, but I may be mistaken, but I thought I saw Councillor Pearson indicating. I don't know whether he had any further clarification.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It was just a question of how the licensing authority, with regard to condition 13, and indeed the police, would police that particular requirement or point.
Just in response to that aspect from a policing perspective, that's why I said we wouldn't accept that in relation to it, because given the current lease that's been provided, obviously I accept Mr. Craig has tried to word it in such a way so that it wouldn't be licensable or involve licensable activities, but given the current lease is involved, there are obviously the parties as landlords have rights to enter those premises. So from our point of view, that condition in itself is not one that we would seek to enhance or alter, because we feel that would be quite difficult to police that aspect.
If I could respond, Councillor Pearson, to that on two levels. First of all, well, I think it is, I mean, obviously resources are an issue for the police, as they are for any responsible authority, but if there's any evidence of any involvement in the management or operation of the premises, then that is a breach of that condition, which Kevin is the licence holder, capable of being prosecuted for that. And I think that's actually something actually potentially relatively straightforward, in fact, to demonstrate. So I do think, I just have to make the point that you need to be careful, in my view, and you'll take legal advice on this, of limiting your deliberations to the scope of the Licensing Act. And just because it simply can't be right, in my view, that if somebody owns a property, they are precluded from leasing that to somebody else by virtue of their conduct under the Licensing Act. Because what that means is you're effectively saying to them, you can't lease that business to anybody. Well, that's a dangerous road to go down, quite frankly. Really, it's down to this applicant, what you think about him, and where you think he will robustly comply with that condition to ensure that they aren't involved in the running of the business. And if they're not, then frankly, all that's going to happen is he's going to pay him rent every month, and that's the end of it. So that's a matter for you. But I don't respect. I would just counsel against going too far with that, because you're getting into dangerous territory then if you're saying to people, we just won't allow you to lease this to anybody while you own it. Well, that's impinging on these property rights. I would submit. You'll get legal advice on that, but I feel compelled to make that point, Chair, Councillor Pearson, and members as well, colleagues. I'm grateful. Thank you.
Right. Yeah, so it's 20 to now. Like I said, we'll be put into separate breakout rooms. We'll obviously deliberate, make our decision in private session, and then we'll come back. Hopefully we'll be able to give you an answer by 10 past, but if not at that point, we'll hopefully be able to give you an indication of how much more time we need. So if our technology staff can do the magic, she'll see you in about 30 minutes time. Thank you.
Hello, it's Richard Jackson here from City of York Council on the webcasting front. I think we've got everybody we need. If that's the case, we can go live again. I'll do that.
Thanks,
Thank
Richard.
you. Ready to go.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And welcome back, everybody. And thank you for just bearing with us a little bit longer there than we thought we would be. We've considered this application very carefully, and we've taken into account everything we've heard from both parties. The panel decided to go with option 4, which is the refusal of the application. Detailed reasons, Mr. Leung, will follow in writing from our democracy service, as well as details there about the right of appeal through the Magistrates Court. But yeah, option 4 is the decision we're going with. So thank you all for your time today. It's been a long morning. I appreciate everybody's patience.
Yeah, may I just ask roughly what timescale Mr. Leung can expect that decision notice?
I would hope within a week. It shouldn't say much longer than that. Obviously, it's just based on workload of getting the everything drawn up. Obviously, there's a few different documents that come together to make that happen. So, but I would hope within a week.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Cheers.
Thanks for your time. Thank you, Mr. Leung, for attending as well.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.